Excited to be here with beautiful ideas for using Quarry Arctic salmon. You know, one of the things that's been happening as we've been stocking up our kitchens and our pantries is that we're really thinking about what we can keep on hand and how we can preserve things. I don't know about you, but I don't want to waste anything. I don't want to waste my time when I'm out and about, and I certainly don't want to waste anything in the kitchen. And so I'm trying to be really mindful about all of the things that I'm cooking with and trying to make sure that I'm utilizing every single thing. And today we're actually going to be making this beautiful Quarry Arctic salmon. And one of the things that I think about is not just for dinner tonight, but also for dinner the next night and the next night and the next night. And given that both my husband Daryl and I are at home, we're working from home, and we also need some things for lunches, I'm also thinking about what can be ready to just pull out of the pantry for lunch. Now, Quarry Arctic salmon is this stunning salmon that is a farm salmon out from all the way up in the Arctic Circle. It's this beautiful family. All Foreign and his family have been farming there for 4 generations. Now, there's not often a story that we can tell about water farmers that's 4 generations. It reminds me of my grandfather, who was a rancher for 4 generations in Colorado. And you know, when I think about that beautiful work that's happening on the water, and of course, all of the things that are so important to bringing this beautiful food to us, I go back and think about my grandfather, and really often his family remind me of that. This Quarry Arctic salmon is so stunning. It's actually raised in these open net pens in beautiful fjords in the Arctic Circle. It's fed with all natural ingredients, no GMOs, no antibiotics, really beautiful microalgae. So it's getting all of the nutrition. But you know, one of the things that I think about is when I look at the foods that we eat, is I think of things and I think, is it good for the environment? Is it good for the plants or the animals that we're raising? And is it good for you? And in the case of Quarry Arctic salmon, believe it or not, it actually has more omega-3s, both the long chain and the short chain omega-3s, than any other Atlantic salmon, including wild. Now, you need those omega-3s, particularly those long chain omega-3s, to protect yourself from all of the things that are going on out in the environment right now, as well as keeping you sharp, keeping your mind and your body as healthy as possible. So look for this. You'll see how beautiful and rich the color is, the fat lines, and of course that's going to give you something that everyone really, really loves when you're cooking it at home. One of the first things you're going to notice about this fish is there's almost no aroma to it. You know, when you're looking at fish, you want it to be really glossy. You want the color to be deep and beautiful. This color comes from krill and algae that are natural, that are put into the feed. And I noticed too, these gorgeous fat lines that are going to make it really buttery and delicious for the dishes that we're going to make today. And I also notice about it that it's going to have this almost, it's the miroir, almost this bright, really ocean flavor. So you're looking for something that's going to be very, very natural, really delicious, and of course have all of that bright freshness that you would come to expect from anything that's going to be perfectly raised with care. So the recipes that we're going to make today are all about preserving the food, being able to preserve things so that you can really think about having them not just for dinner today or tomorrow, but also in the weeks to come. Now, one of the things that we want to think about, and we're going to do several different recipes today. We're going to look at how do we marinate? Can we marinate ahead of time, both with dry and moist marinades? We're also going to do a recipe. I kind of love this because now we're sort of stretching into the cobwebs of our mind and I'm thinking about old recipes. And this was a recipe that I put in my first cookbook, The Kitchen Coach Weeknight Cooking, and it was foods that travel well. And the idea was that we could pack them up and have them go on a picnic, but in this case now, being able to pull it right out of the refrigerator. Now, the thing that this recipe is going to remind you of is kind of a confit. And for those of you that don't know what a duck confit is, it's when we cook down the duck legs and the thigh, we shred the meat, and then we take the rendered duck fat. And with that shredded meat, we pour it into a jar and then take the rendered duck fat and butter and put it over the top. The butter, the layer of butter on top, actually preserves the duck. We put the lid on and we're able to keep it in the refrigerator for several weeks. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is you can take some leftover salmon, and you can see how beautiful this Quarry Arctic salmon is. It's got that rich kind of butteriness to it. And do you see how all I've done is flaked it a little bit? So really super simple is just to flake whatever you've got left over. The thing I love about this is that you could take those little add-on pieces or pieces of the belly meat and be able to cook this and chop it up. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is season it with just a little bit of cayenne pepper. We're going to be using a lot of dried herbs and spices today. And one of the things that I want you to know is that these don't last forever. And especially now when we need to think about our foods really giving the most flavor that they can. I want you to get into your spice cabinet, take a look, and try to figure out how long it's been there. If you got this jar of spices when you got married 27 years ago, it's probably not going to have a lot of the oils and the flavor left in it. Dried herbs last about 1 year, and dried spices last about 18 months. So take a look. It's really good too if you want to actually mark them with the date when you buy them. And it's really better, like in this case, I keep mine in a closed drawer so that they stay really nice and of course protected from the light. So keep them in the dark. Now, we're gonna take and make our salmon. I've seasoned it with a little bit of cayenne pepper, and I'm also going to season it with some fresh dill. Now here's another tip. If we're going to buy fresh herbs now, one of the things that we want to do is not waste them. And I don't know about you, but how many times have you gotten a recipe, it called for 1 tablespoon of dill, which is in the case of this recipe, it's going to, and then you watch this shrivel up and die in the refrigerator, in the bag or the container you bought it in. Well, instead, think of it as a flower. What I do is I cut the stems off, I put the water into, this is just a glass, a drinking glass, but you could have it in a jar. Cut the stems, the bottom, put it in, loosely wrap it in plastic wrap. It'll actually last about 7 to 10 days longer. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take the little fronds of the dill and I'm going to chop it up. And what I want to do is just do a really light chop on this, because the more you chop it, the less flavorful it will be. It actually oxidizes and loses some of its sweetness. So I'm gonna put that into my salmon. Now, one of your other pantry items, and we know this, unsalted butter. Now remember this, maybe you don't know this, but butter actually, when it's unsalted, is fresher than salted. It's sweet from the great green grasses that the cows are actually grazing on, and then the butter is churned from that. When they add salt to it, it actually acts as a preservative and lasts longer. The other thing is, I want to be able to season my dish, and I never know, depending on when the cows were milked, how much salt was added to the butter. If the milk was less sweet, they would add more salt. So what I want to do in this case is buy unsalted butter and then be able to season it myself. So what I've done is I've gently heated the butter and then I've allowed it to cool. And I want it to be basically about body temperature. I don't want it to be really hot because I'm not trying to cook the salmon itself. And then what I'm going to do is just really kind of mix it. Now, you're gonna start off with about 2 cups of salmon, and we're gonna add about half a cup of butter to this. So you can see how it really is just nice and moist. And then I'm gonna take and I'm gonna put a little bit of butter in the bottom of this jar. And what I wanna do is, I just wanna kind of roll it around. You can see how if I roll it around, I get a nice little layer of the butter inside the jar itself. And then I'm gonna add our salmon. Now you can see how naturally, this made just such a beautiful, almost pate from the fish itself. Don't want to miss any of it. And I'm just going to sort of loosely pack it in the jar. We don't have to really press it down. And then I'm going to add the butter to it, and I'm going to allow that butter to really kind of fill in all of the spaces, leaving about 1/4 of an inch on top of the jar. And then the final thing is, I'm going to wipe the sides of the jar down because I don't want to have any of those drips. That's not going to help as that preservative that I need, because I'm really going to get kind of a seal on the top with this. And then I'm going to put the jar lid on very, very tightly, and I'm going to put it in the refrigerator. Now, you could do this in ramekins as well if you wanted to, but one of the things I like about this is it'll actually last longer. So here, take a look. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator, and it's going to solidify. And you can see how I actually made one that was already done in a ramekin and how I got that seal over the top with the fat. Now, this is going to go on beautiful garlic toast. And I know, if we're going to buy bread, one of the things I hate about beautiful fresh loaves of bread is that they go bad. Well, we don't want any of those to go bad now. What I want you to do is always keep it, cut off the edges if you have to, use those ends first because those dry up the fastest, and then anything you have left over, just wrap up and put in the freezer. You're never going to believe what the freezer pantry gave me today. It gave me the most delicious bread that my dear friend Eric Wolfinger brought for us when he came to visit several weeks ago. He actually used to bake at Tartine Bakery in San Francisco. And he brought this bread, and it almost makes me want to cry now thinking about it, because we had this beautiful weekend of food and wine, and what is a better gift than this luscious bread? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually take our bread, and I have brushed it with a little bit of butter. Now in the recipe, it calls for you to take that bread and brush it with a garlic olive oil. Well, I'm going to teach you a little fast scratch trick. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edge of my knife and I'm just going to hit that little paper thin garlic, that little paper around the outside of the garlic, and you'll see that then that paper pops right off. If you just want to bake the bread with a little brush of olive oil, and then what I do while it's hot when it comes out of the oven is just rub it. Oh my gosh, this is like, smells so good. You can't even imagine how delicious this is. So I'm just gonna rub Eric's bread with the garlic. And again, you could have chopped it and made a garlic olive oil out of it if you wanted to. That's totally fine. And then I'm gonna take this beautiful salmon pate. Oh my gosh. I hope you guys are seeing how delicious this is. And you can see how I just get this really rich, beautiful terrine that then I can serve over bread. It's the perfect way to preserve the salmon, to be able to have it in the refrigerator for as long as you need for it to. I think that you can probably keep it in the fridge for up to a couple of weeks. And I'm just gonna put some beautiful little chunks of this salmon on there. And then what I like to do, and this is 100% up to you, but I like to actually take a little bit of lemon zest, a little add on to the recipe, a little secret there. Just a little lemon zest before I serve it. And then a couple of little fronds of the dill, just because, listen, just because we're home doesn't mean that things can't look pretty. I think we put a little bit of the fronds of the dill over it, and it'll make such a nice, beautiful little lunch or dinner for the family. And it really is something that everyone will love. I have to tell you, I think that this is such a lovely recipe, one that I think the entire family is going to enjoy. Now, there are a couple of other recipes that I wanted to make for you because this is all about preserving the fish. And one of the things that I like to do is marinade. Now, marinades, of course, they come in all shapes and sizes. And depending on the meat that you're marinating, really will depend on how long you can keep it in the marinade itself. So the tip here, the little hack is, you can keep meat, whether it's red meat, lamb, in a marinade for up to 48 hours. You can keep chicken in a marinade in the refrigerator, of course, for up to 24 hours. And if you're cooking fish and you want to marinate it and cook it right away, you can keep it in the refrigerator in the marinade for 30 minutes. But guess what? You can actually freeze in a marinade. And so that's what we're going to do today. So the quick tip here is that you can take your fresh salmon that you've just bought and you can make a marinade out of it and you can freeze it in the marinade. So here's what I do. And I have always really loved all different kinds of mustards. And I am telling you, you can do anything you want in terms of mustards and blend them all and mix them all together. One of my favorite stores, and you can find it online, is Olivier. They're actually out of St. Helena in the Napa Valley. They make so many different kinds of mustards that I actually will go up there, stock the pantry, stock the entire pantry with these gorgeous mustards. I'm gonna open this real quick. You can tell I haven't done all of these yet. But I actually will stock up on all different flavors of mustards, and then I make this marinade out of it. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to use a little bit of this grainy mustard, and I'm just going to put 2 tablespoons of it into a baggie. So this is going to be our wet marinade, and you'll see on the Quarry Arctic blog that we're going to give you several different wet marinades and several different dry marinades that are perfect for salmon. And guess what? We're going to freeze them in the marinade. And then all you have to do is just either thaw them in the refrigerator, or depending on how you're cooking it, in most cases, you can actually cook it from frozen straight to the oven. I've got this kind of a beer mustard that's got horseradish and herbs in it. I've got this grainy mustard. This is actually a flour mustard that I found at Oakville Grocer. Don't be stingy about that. You know, if you think about it, they're fat-free, they're gorgeous in flavor, and they can really accentuate flavor too without overcooking the fish. Now, what would I mean about that? What could I possibly mean by overcook the fish? Because Jen, I'm going to be putting it in the freezer. I'm not cooking it. Well, the truth is, anything that's an acid will actually cook the fish, because acids strengthen the protein. It's like when you squeeze lemon juice over the top of the fish and you can see it turn from translucent to opaque. Well, it does cook it. And it's one of the reasons why I don't recommend, for example, that you freeze a fish in a teriyaki marinade, because with all of the soy sauce and all of the vinegars and things in it, it'll overcook it. Now, there's something else I want to show you here, because this is really special. These little tins, you can see I'm going to put a tablespoon of whole sage into this recipe. These tins were from my original Nothing to It cooking school. And what I've done is, every time I switch out my spices, I just buy spices and then put them in now. But it's this great memento of something that I started over 20 years ago. So, the old days. So what I'm going to do now is very important. I'm actually going to rub those herbs in between my hands. Why would I do that? Well, when I'm rubbing those herbs in between my hands, I'm warming the oils in them. It's actually bringing out the flavor. You know, you see this with chefs like Rick Bayless and others, where they will warm it, and then they'll do it though in a cooktop, like in a skillet or in a pan or even in the oven. Now I'm also going to add, here's the acid part, right? We've got acids in the marinade. We want to have a little bit to help us bring out flavor. So I'm going to use some white wine vinegar. Vinegars will last up to 2 years in your pantry. Where olive oil, and we need a little bit of moisture in this, your olive oil is actually only going to last about a year. And we want you to buy olive oil in these dark green bottles, because that actually helps protect the olive oil from light, as well as, of course, a nice tight lid protecting it from the air as well. Now, the other thing that's important, I'm not sure if you know this, but garlic is actually harvested once a year. and it does get old. So we get our beautiful summertime garlic, and then we're storing it throughout the year in order to be able to buy it. So it gets a little bit dry, and I wanted to show you this little technique because I do it all the time, and people used to wonder, what in the world was I doing when I would always call for garlic to be creamed? So there are a couple of things that you should know. The first one is, whenever you bring home things like garlic, onions, make sure you keep them in a paper bag in a dry, cool place. So under your sink is perfect, or over your stove if you've got a cabinet. That's a perfect place. Don't put garlic with your potatoes because that actually ages the garlic more. That moisture is going to age the garlic and onions more. Now, the next thing that I'm gonna look for is I'm gonna make sure that there isn't a really big vein in the middle of this garlic, because sometimes you'll get like a green vein, and that green vein can be very bitter. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of salt over the garlic. And what that does is the salt will actually bring out the moisture in the garlic, and it allows me to bring out its sweetness, because we talked about this already. The sweetness of things is really brought out by salt. Remember what we were talking about with the butter. Now watch this. I'm gonna take the edge of my knife. Now you might need to move your cutting board a little bit over the counter, and I'm going to do what's called creaming the garlic. Do you see how I get this beautiful garlic cream that is really, you can see it, right? You can see the moisture coming out in it. Now you could use a garlic press if you wanted, and you can do extra of this if you want. So this would have been good in our garlic butter. You can just store it in some olive oil in the refrigerator, but look at how beautiful that garlic is. Really lovely, very moist, and really flavorful. So even if the garlic was a little bit old, that's okay, because we've now creamed it and brought out some of that moisture. Now, what I'm going to do is close the bag, and I'm just going to, you can see, I'm just blending it, mixing it together in the bag itself. And now here comes the salmon. So what I want to do, and in this case, what I recommend is do it with the skin on, and go ahead and marinate for the portions that you know that your family is going to be eating. Or, as I said before, don't forget about, dinner the next night or the next night. So here's the little hack. Watch what I can do now. I can make sure that that marinade is getting rubbed into our beautiful Quarry Arctic salmon. And then making sure that it's flat and in a single layer, you can take it and put it in the freezer. Now, this is gonna freeze for somewhere, you can keep it in the freezer for about 6 months. You can take it straight from the freezer, lay it onto a cookie sheet. I like to line the cookie sheet with aluminum foil and just bake it in the oven at about 400 degrees. It also will now at this point microwave beautifully. You could just put it into a small, like a Pyrex dish with a little bit of oil, a little bit of moisture, a drizzle or two of water, cover it with plastic wrap, and actually be able to make it then in the microwave as well. It's basically just gonna steam it. But the main thing is, and even if you wanted, and I would suggest if you're going to grill it, and you could grill it with this, to go ahead and thaw it, just pat it dry, and then put it on a really nice hot grill. But you get the idea, right? I mean, it's coming together so beautifully and so easily. Now, what I wanted to do, the last thing I wanted to make for you today is a dry marinade. And, dried marinades, I'm just gonna clean up here one sec. Dried marinades are basically just herb rubs. And they come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, we've had, of course, we have these dry marinades, like you think about, everybody thinks about a Cajun rub, right? a Cajun rub. We're gonna give you a recipe for one that is so perfect with salmon. It's actually got brown sugar in it. It's really, really delicious. In this case, this one's just going to be a lemon herb dry marinade. And I love this. And I use lots of dried herbs in this for a very specific reason, because if I were to use fresh herbs in this, then they're going to brown when they're in the freezer. So we're going to use just these beautiful, rich, fresh, dried spices and dried herbs, excuse me. And as I said, those are gonna last roughly about a year, and only if you're keeping them in a dry, cool place. So if you have a mortar and pestle, you can go ahead and you can put all of these blended together in a mortar and pestle, or even if you've got an electric grinder. Don't use your coffee grinder, but that kind of idea. Now, instead, if you want a little hack, which I will give you, I actually use this handy dandy thing, my rolling pin. So I've got some green peppercorns in here to start. And the first thing that I'm going to do is roll across those peppercorns to just get them moderately kind of crushed. My friend, and may she rest in peace, Julia Child, used to really give it a whack. I'm not sure you need to do that, but have fun with it, whatever you want. Green peppercorns. And then I'm also going to add to this, now in this I've got parsley, I've got chervil, I've got tarragon. I'm going to use a little bit of garlic powder. It's gonna really bring out some richness. We're gonna add our tarragon here. See I gotta love these old tins. So amazing. It's always important to remember where you came from. All of that gratitude that comes from where we came from. And then I'm going to add a little bit of kosher salt. Now, one of the things too that we want to think about, you want to salt after you're cooking. You don't want to use as you're cooking. You don't want to use a lot of salt before. So if I use a lot of salt in this now, it actually is going to really accentuate the flavor of those fish and potentially even get it over salty. But you can see that I've got this beautiful herb rub, and then I also need to do some lemon peel. Now, you shouldn't ever really be wasting the lemon peel. It is this little beautiful zest that actually has more lemon flavor, more oils than the lemon juice itself. You don't want any of the pith. You can use a knife if you want to. Oop. I'm gonna add that in to my baggie. And then like we did before, we're just gonna put this beautiful Poiré salmon into the baggie. We're going to get it all nice and blended with our rub. So you can see how that gorgeous herb rub is gonna coat the salmon. My grandma used to make shake and bake. Does anybody remember that? I feel a little bit like that's what we're doing today. We wanna get that salmon really beautifully crusted. We've got one piece here that doesn't seem to wanna play nice. We're gonna turn it a little bit. But you can see how it gets all just beautifully coated. Let me show you. Isn't that gorgeous? God, that salmon is just so lovely. And then we'll put that in the freezer. So same thing, just gonna make sure that we've got our bag sealed up, and then we'll put that in the freezer for up to 6 months. So you get the idea. We can make these things, we can have a beautiful dinner for tonight, we can have a beautiful dinner for tomorrow night, and then as you start to think about cooking in the weeks to come and bringing your family around the table, you can also have something that's gonna make dinner a little bit easier. Remember what I always say, which is that, food isn't something that just nourishes the body, it nurtures the soul. So look for Poiré Arctic salmon, and thank you so much for joining me today.